Major Dominic Merritt stared at the empty house, his duffel bag still slung over his shoulder. The silence was deafening. No squealing children racing to greet him. No Valerie waiting at the door with that smile that had carried him through 15 months in the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan. "Val?" he called out, his voice echoing through the hollow rooms. The furniture remained. Family photos still adorned the walls, but something felt terribly wrong. A thin layer of dust covered the surfaces. Mail had piled up on the kitchen counter. Dominic moved through the house, his military training kicking in despite the panic rising in his chest. In their bedroom, he found drawers partially emptied. In the children's rooms, favorite toys and clothes were missing. Nothing seemed ransacked or forcibly disturbed, just selectively absent. He pulled out his phone and called Valerie. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. "Hey, neighbor." A voice called from the front door, which Dominic had left open. Thelma Prentice, the elderly woman from across the street, stood on his porch. "I thought that was you. We weren't expecting you back for another month." "Where's my family, Thelma?" Dominic asked, his voice tight. Thelma's expression shifted. "You mean you don't know?" "Valerie said you two had discussed everything. She said you were getting a divorce and she was taking the kids to stay with her mother for a while." Dominic felt the world tilt beneath him. Her mother's been dead for 5 years. Thelma's hand flew to her mouth. Oh dear. Within hours, Dominic had filed a missing persons report for Valerie and their 3 children. 10-year-old Quincy, 8-year-old Ren, and 6-year-old Porter. The police initially seemed unconcerned, suggesting that marital problems often led to one spouse taking the children temporarily. "She didn't leave a note?" Officer Bennett asked, skepticism evident in his voice. "No," Dominic replied firmly. "And we weren't having problems. I just spoke with her 3 days ago on video chat. Everything was fine. Sometimes people hide things," Bennett said with practiced neutrality, "especially from someone who's been away for over a year." Dominic clenched his jaw. "Check our bank accounts. Check her credit cards. She hasn't used any of them. That's not someone who planned to leave. That's someone who disappeared." As days turned into weeks, Dominic uncovered disturbing details. 2 months before her disappearance, Valerie had begun visiting a therapist. Friends reported she seemed anxious, distracted. Their joint account showed several large cash withdrawals. Their minivan was found abandoned at a shopping mall 50 miles away. The media latched onto the story. Military hero's family vanishes. Dominic's commanding officer granted emergency leave, but even with the publicity, leads were scarce. 3 months after their disappearance, Dominic sat across from Detective Silas Hawthorne, a weathered man with sharp eyes who had taken a personal interest in the case. "I've been doing this for 27 years, Hawthorne said, "and something doesn't add up. Your wife didn't just run off with the kids on a whim." "I know," Dominic said, exhaustion etched into his face. "So what happened to them?" "I think someone else was involved," Hawthorne replied, sliding a folder across the table. "We found these on her therapist's notes." Valerie mentioned feeling watched, receiving strange calls. She thought someone was following her. Dominic's blood ran cold. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "Because we needed to rule you out first," Hawthorne said bluntly. "Standard procedure. But I'm convinced now, your family may have been targeted. The question is, by whom?" As they delved deeper, fragments of a troubling picture emerged. In the months before her disappearance, Valerie had been researching identity theft protection. She'd visited a private investigator but canceled her appointment at the last minute. And most chillingly, security footage from their bank showed her looking repeatedly over her shoulder as she withdrew large sums of cash. She was scared, Dominic realized. She was preparing to run. But from what? Hawthorne asked. The answer came from an unexpected source. Valerie's best friend, Anika, finally came forward with trembling hands and a flash drive. "She made me promise not to give this to anyone unless something happened to her," Anika explained. "I've been terrified to come forward, but I can't keep it anymore." The drive contained a video of Valerie, her face drawn with fear. "Dom, if you're watching this, something's gone wrong," she began. "I've discovered something I shouldn't have. I can't explain everything, but people are after me. Powerful people. I have to take the kids and disappear for a while. I'm so sorry to do this to you, but it's the only way to keep them safe. Please don't look for us. It's not safe for you either. I love you. We all do. Forgive me." The video ended, leaving Dominic and Detective Hawthorne in stunned silence. What the hell did she discover? Dominic whispered. Chapter 2. The Vanishing. 6 months after Valerie and the children vanished, Dominic lived in a purgatory of uncertainty. His leave had long expired, forcing him to return to Afghanistan with the investigation ongoing. Every night, he called Detective Hawthorne for updates that never came. Every morning, he woke to the same reality. His family was still missing. From halfway around the world, Dominic pursued every possible lead. He hired private investigators. He launched social media campaigns. He contacted every friend and relative Valerie had ever mentioned. Nothing yielded results. The military psychologist assigned to his case suggested he prepare himself for the possibility that his family might never be found. Unresolved grief can destroy a person, she cautioned. At some point, you may need to consider moving forward. I'll move forward when I know what happened to them, Dominic replied, his voice like steel. On deployment, Dominic's focus made him legendary, a soldier who seemed fearless, volunteering for the most dangerous missions. His commanding officers noticed the change in him, this new recklessness. You have a death wish, Merritt? Colonel Vaughn asked after a particularly risky operation. No, sir, Dominic replied. I just have nothing left to lose. Vaughn studied him. That's what worries me. Back home, Detective Hawthorne refused to let the case go cold. Something about Valerie's disappearance nagged at him. The precision of it, the completeness. This wasn't a panicked flight. It was a calculated vanishing. We're missing something, he told his partner. Normal people don't know how to disappear this thoroughly. The breakthrough came 14 months after the disappearance. A routine facial recognition scan flagged a woman at a private elementary school in Oregon, 1,500 miles from where Valerie had disappeared. The image quality was poor, but the algorithm found a 67% match to Valerie Merritt. Hawthorne immediately dispatched local officers to investigate. By the time they arrived, the woman had vanished. But school records showed 3 children enrolled under the surname Locklear, ages that matched the Merritt children. When Dominic received the call, he was in the middle of a firefight in a remote valley. He didn't get the message until 12 hours later, stumbling exhausted into the base. We might have found them. Hawthorne's voice crackled through the satellite connection. But they're gone again. Someone tipped them off. I'm coming home, Dominic said. Already cleared it with your CO? Hawthorne replied. There's more. The house where they were staying was purchased through a shell company. Records trace back to a corporate executive named Prescott Kendall. Who is he? CEO of Sentinel Healthcare Systems. Very wealthy, very connected. And here's the kicker. Facial recognition also got a hit on him with your wife at a fundraiser 6 months ago. They weren't just in the same place. They were together. The revelation hit Dominic like physical blow. You're saying my wife is with this man? Voluntarily. I'm saying we need to find out, Hawthorne responded carefully. But Kendall has resources. If he's helping her hide, that explains a lot about how they've stayed under the radar. By the time Dominic returned stateside, Hawthorne had compiled a file on Prescott Kendall. 52 years old, divorced, no children. Harvard Business School. Connections in politics and finance. A man who moved through the world with the ease of privilege and power. We can't just confront him, Hawthorne warned. If he's involved, he'll deny everything. And if he's helping your wife hide because she's genuinely afraid of something, we could be putting them in danger. So what do? Dominic asked. We watch. We gather evidence. And we figure out what your wife was running from in the first place. They began surveillance on Kendall, a difficult task given his security measures and private properties across the country. Dominic, unable to sit idle, took matters into his own hands. He located Kendall's personal assistant, a young woman named Bryony Williams, and followed her for days, learning her routine. On a rainy Tuesday, he approached her at her regular coffee shop. Miss Williams, he said, sitting down across from her. I need to talk to you about Prescott Kendall. Her eyes widened. Who are you? My name is Dominic Merritt. Your boss is involved with my wife, who disappeared with my children 18 months ago. Bryony's face paled. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, Dominic said quietly. And I think you also know it's wrong to keep children from their father. Something in his words struck a chord. Bryony glanced around nervously. I can't help you. He would know it was me. I'm not asking you to betray him openly, Dominic assured her. Just tell me, are my children safe? Is my wife with him voluntarily? Bryony hesitated, then nodded slightly. They seem happy. The children call him Uncle Press. They've been with him almost a year now. The confirmation was both a relief and a knife to Dominic's heart. Why? Why would she do this? I don't know the whole story, Bryony admitted. But she's terrified of something, or someone. Sometimes I overhear them talking about making sure it's safe before they can come out of hiding. Dominic slid a burner phone across the table. If you ever learn anything else, anything that might help me understand, please call me. When he reported back to Hawthorne, the detective was furious. You could have blown our whole investigation. What were you thinking? I was thinking that those are my children, Dominic snapped. And apparently they're calling another man uncle, while I've been living in hell for nearly 2 years. Hawthorne's expression softened slightly. Look, I get it. But we need to be smart about this. Kendall isn't just some guy. He has connections. If we move too soon, he could make this very difficult. So we keep watching, Dominic said bitterly. We build a case, Hawthorne corrected. And when we move, we make sure it sticks. But fate had other plans. 2 weeks later, Hawthorne called Dominic at 3 a.m. Kendall's on the move, he said urgently. Private jet filed a flight plan to Switzerland. Leaving in 4 hours. With my family? We don't know. But we need to move now if we want to find out. By dawn, they were positioned outside Kendall's estate, watching as a private security team loaded luggage into waiting SUVs. And then, Dominic saw them. Quincy, taller than he remembered. Wren, her hair now cut short. Porter, barely recognizable at nearly 8 years old. And behind them, Valerie, holding hands with Prescott Kendall. That's them, Dominic whispered, his voice breaking. My God, that's them. Hawthorne placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. We've got them, Merritt. We finally got them. As the family approached the vehicles, Hawthorne gave the signal. Police cruisers converged on the property, blocking the exits. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, shouting commands. Dominic watched as Valerie's face transformed with terror. She pulled the children against her as Kendall stepped protectively in front of them, raising his hands. As officers detained Kendall, Dominic approached his family for the first time in 2 years. Valerie stared at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. Fear, guilt, and something else, something harder. Daddy? Wren asked uncertainly, her small voice cutting through the chaos. Dominic knelt to her level, tears streaming openly down his face. Yes, sweetheart. It's Daddy. He's alive. Porter whispered to his mother in confusion. It was then that Dominic understood the final, devastating truth. Valerie had told their children he was dead. Chapter 3, Deceptions. They're not going anywhere with him, Valerie declared, her voice shrill as she clutched the children closer. You don't understand what you're doing. Detective Hawthorne stepped forward, his demeanor professionally calm. Mrs. Merritt, you're being detained on suspicion of parental kidnapping. The children will be placed in protective custody until this situation is resolved. My name is Valentine Locklear, she insisted, eyes wild. There's been a mistake. Prescott Kendall, composed despite the handcuffs, addressed his lawyer who had arrived minutes after the police. Roland, get this straightened out immediately. This is harassment. Dominic watched the scene unfold as if from a great distance. The children, his children, looked at him with confusion and fear rather than joy. Quincy, his oldest, stood protectively in front of his siblings, a miniature guardian. None of them recognized their father as someone to trust. At the police station, the family was separated. Valerie and Kendall were placed in different interview rooms, while social workers took the children to a comfortable lounge designed for young witnesses. I want to see them, Dominic demanded. Not yet, Hawthorne advised. Let's establish some facts first. We need to understand what they've been told. Through the one-way glass, Dominic watched as Detective Hawthorne interviewed his wife. Valerie sat rigidly, refusing to answer questions about her identity. We have DNA samples from your children's personal items, Hawthorne explained patiently. We can establish their identities within hours. Making this difficult only prolongs everyone's suffering. You've just guaranteed their suffering, Valerie replied cryptically. You have no idea what you've done. In the adjacent room, Kendall was the picture of corporate confidence. I've committed no crime, he stated. I've been helping a woman and her children who came to me in fear for their lives. And you didn't think to contact authorities? Hawthorne's partner questioned. She specifically feared certain authorities, Kendall replied smoothly. Given my resources, I chose to help her directly. By creating false identities? By helping her deprive a father of his children. By saving them from what she believed was a deadly threat, Kendall countered. Everything I did was to protect a family in danger. Meanwhile, Dominic was permitted to speak with the social worker who had been interviewing the children. They believe their father died in combat, she confirmed gently. They were told about 2 years ago. The youngest barely remembers you. The oldest is very protective. He says his uncle Prescott is his father now. Dominic pressed his palms against his eyes. How do I even begin to undo this damage? Carefully, the social worker advised. With professional help. These children have experienced significant trauma, regardless of the circumstances that led to it. As DNA results confirmed what they already knew. These were indeed the Merritt children, the legal machinery ground into motion. Emergency custody hearings were scheduled. Charges of kidnapping and identity fraud were filed against both Valerie and Kendall. Kendall's high-powered attorney immediately requested a private meeting with the district attorney, Detective Hawthorne, and Dominic. My client would like to explain the situation, Roland Forsythe began, his voice cultured and precise. There are extenuating circumstances that must be considered before this proceeds further. Your client helped kidnap 3 children. The DA responded flatly. My client protected 3 children and their mother from what they all believed was imminent danger, Forsythe corrected. And that danger may still exist. All eyes turned to Kendall, who looked directly at Dominic for the first time. Major Merritt, he began, I understand your anger. In your position, I'd feel the same. But there's something you don't know. Then enlighten me. Dominic replied coldly. 2 years ago, your wife contacted me through a mutual acquaintance. She was terrified, convinced that she and your children were being targeted because of something she discovered. And what was that? Kendall hesitated. A black market organ trafficking operation, using military medical evacuation channels. She found financial records linking several high-ranking officials to offshore accounts receiving payments for medical supplies that didn't exist. The room fell silent. That's absurd, Dominic finally said. Valerie was a part-time bookkeeper for a local construction company. How would she access military medical records? She didn't, Kendall explained. But her brother did. Another revelation hit Dominic. Lyle, Valerie's brother, had been a combat medic who died in a training accident 3 months before Valerie disappeared. Are you suggesting Lyle's death wasn't an accident? Dominic asked, his voice strained. Valerie believed it wasn't, Kendall confirmed. She said he had been acting strangely before his death, saying he'd discovered something terrible. After he died, she found encrypted files he'd sent her. When she finally accessed them, she panicked and reached out to me. Why you? Detective Hawthorne interjected. Because my company develops medical tracking systems for multiple government agencies. She thought I might verify what she'd found. Instead, I advised her to go to authorities. She refused, convinced they were compromised. This is convenient fiction, the DA said dismissively. Do you have any evidence of these supposed trafficking operations? The evidence is in a secure location, Kendall replied. Valerie wouldn't tell even me where. She said it was her insurance policy. Dominic stood abruptly. I need to talk to her. Alone. The request was irregular, but ultimately granted. Valerie sat in the interview room, still refusing to acknowledge her true identity, when Dominic entered. Is it true? He asked without preamble. About Lyle? About why you ran. Valerie's composure cracked slightly. They told me not to trust anyone. Not even you. Who told you that? Lyle, she whispered. Before he died. He said the operation reached into every branch of the military. He didn't know who was involved and who wasn't. So you let me think our family had been murdered? Dominic's voice broke. You let me live in hell for 2 years. Tears spilled down Valerie's cheeks. I had to protect our children. I was going to contact you once we were safely out of the country. Prescott promised we'd find a way. Prescott, Dominic repeated bitterly. You seem very comfortable with him. Valerie looked away. He saved us. Gave us new identities, a home, security. The children needed stability. They needed their father. They thought their father was a hero who died serving his country. Valerie shot back. Instead of telling them their father might be working with the same people who killed their uncle. The accusation landed like a physical blow. You actually believed I could be involved in something like that? I didn't know what to believe anymore, Valerie admitted. Everything was falling apart. I just wanted them safe. As they talked, really talked, for the first time in years, a complex picture emerged. Valerie's fear had been genuine, if possibly misguided. Her relationship with Kendall had begun as protector and protected, but had evolved into something more. And most painfully for Dominic, the children had adjusted to their new life, with Kendall as a father figure. "I need to see them," Dominic said finally. "Whatever happens legally, whatever truths we uncover about Lyle's accusations, those are my children. I've lost 2 years I can never get back." Valerie nodded slowly. They should know the truth. All of it. The reunion was awkward and emotionally raw. Quincy, now 12, regarded his father with suspicion. "Mom said you died a hero," he accused. "She was trying to protect you," Dominic replied gently. "But I'm very much alive, and I've been looking for you every day since you disappeared." Ren, more open than her brother, studied Dominic's face. "I remember you singing to me when I had bad dreams." Porter, the youngest, hid partially behind his siblings. "Are you going to take us away from Uncle Press?" Each innocent question was a dagger to Dominic's heart. "I don't want to take you away from anyone who cares about you," he managed. "I just want to be your dad again." As the legal proceedings continued, a temporary custody arrangement was ordered. The children would live primarily with Dominic, with supervised visitation for Valerie, while the kidnapping charges were investigated. Kendall, released on bail, was prohibited from contact with the family. Detective Hawthorne, meanwhile, took Lyle's allegations seriously. He initiated an investigation into the supposed organ trafficking operation, reaching out to military criminal investigation divisions with Dominic's assistance. 2 months after the family's discovery, Hawthorne brought Dominic unsettling news. "Your brother-in-law might have been onto something," he said grimly. 2 other whistleblowers in military medical logistics died under questionable circumstances in the past 3 years. And offshore accounts linked to a senior medical logistics officer show unexplained deposits totaling millions. So Valerie was right to be afraid, Dominic realized. Partially, Hawthorne qualified. But her method of handling it endangered your children in different ways. And we still don't know the full extent of what she and Kendall were planning. As Dominic rebuilt his relationship with his children, a painful, incremental process, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was still missing crucial pieces of the puzzle. Valerie's behavior during their marriage had never suggested she would abandon him so completely. And her relationship with Kendall still seemed murky. The answer came unexpectedly, through Bryony, Kendall's assistant who had spoken to Dominic months earlier. She contacted him through the burner phone, requesting an urgent meeting. "There's something you need to see," she said, sliding a thumb drive across the table. "Something I found while organizing Prescott's personal files." The drive contained emails between Kendall and Valerie dating back 3 years, long before her disappearance. "They knew each other," Dominic breathed. "The whole time." "There's more," Bryony said quietly. The initial contact came through Lyle. He was consulting for Sentinel Healthcare on military contracts before he died. As Dominic read through the correspondence, a different narrative emerged. Lyle had indeed discovered concerning financial irregularities, but Kendall hadn't been Valerie's savior after she discovered them. He'd been part of her investigation from the beginning. And based on the intimate tone of later emails, their relationship had begun while Dominic was still deployed, months before she disappeared with the children. She didn't run from a threat, Dominic realized, his voice hollow. She ran to him. Chapter 4, Hidden Truths. The revelation of Valerie and Kendall's pre-existing relationship changed everything. What had seemed like a desperate flight from danger now appeared to be something far more calculated and personal. Dominic took the evidence to Detective Hawthorne, who viewed it with grave concern. "This contradicts their entire story," Hawthorne noted. "If they were involved before the disappearance, it suggests a different motive altogether." "She wanted out," Dominic said flatly, "and she didn't want to share custody. But the organ trafficking claims, we've confirmed there's something there." "I think they used a real conspiracy to cover a simpler one," Dominic theorized. Lyle might have stumbled onto something genuine, but they exploited it. Armed with the new evidence, Hawthorne re-interviewed Valerie, confronting her with the emails. Her composure finally cracked. "You don't understand," she insisted, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Prescott and I had feelings for each other. But the danger was real. Lyle's death wasn't an accident. So you admit to having an affair while your husband was deployed?" Hawthorne pressed. Valerie looked away. "It wasn't planned. Prescott was helping me understand what Lyle had found. We spent months working together. It happened. And disappearing with the children? Was that your idea or his? Mine, she admitted. Prescott wanted me to file for divorce, do things legally. But I knew Dom would fight for custody. And if the people Lyle exposed came after us, I couldn't risk a custody arrangement leaving the children vulnerable when Dominic deployed again. The portrait that emerged was of a woman who had convinced herself that her actions were justified by a combination of genuine fear and personal desire. She had woven truth and deception so thoroughly that she herself seemed unable to separate them. For Dominic, the betrayal was absolute. The wife he had mourned, the family he had desperately searched for, all built on lies. His children had been taught to believe their father was dead, while a replacement stood ready. The court system, however, moved. Despite the new evidence, Valerie's attorneys argued that her fear for her children's safety had been genuine, regardless of her relationship with Kendall. They pointed to the ongoing investigation into Lyle's allegations as proof. Prescott Kendall, for his part, maintained a dignified silence in public while his legal team fought viciously in court. His resources seemed limitless, and his reputation remained largely intact, protected by careful public relations management. Meanwhile, Dominic focused on rebuilding his relationship with his children. Quincy remained distant, his trust shattered by years of lies. Ren oscillated between guarded acceptance and confused loyalty to the life she'd known with Kendall. Porter, young enough to adapt more quickly, slowly warmed to the father he barely remembered. Family therapy sessions became a regular part of their lives, providing a structured environment to process the trauma and deceit. "Why didn't you find us sooner?" Quincy demanded during one particularly difficult session. "If you really wanted us, why did it take so long?" The question gutted Dominic. "I never stopped looking," he explained, his voice raw. "Not for a single day. But your mother and Prescott were very careful. They changed your names, moved you across the country, created entirely new identities." "Uncle Press says you didn't care enough to look in the right places," Quincy challenged. Dominic fought to control his anger. "Prescott shouldn't be discussing me with you at all during his visitations. That's part of the court order." "He's just answering our questions," Quincy retorted. "Which is more than you do." The therapist intervened gently, redirecting the conversation, but the exchange highlighted the ongoing battle for the children's hearts and minds. Despite the court restrictions, Kendall clearly maintained a powerful influence over the family he had claimed as his own. 6 months after recovering his family, Dominic received a call from a military investigator named Commander Wilcox. "Major Merritt, we need to speak in person regarding your brother-in-law's allegations." They met at a nondescript office building in Virginia. Commander Wilcox, a sharp-eyed woman with short gray hair, wasted no time. "We've confirmed significant parts of Lyle Patterson's claims," she stated. A network within military medical evacuation channels was indeed diverting resources. However, it wasn't organ trafficking as he believed. "What was it?" Dominic asked. "Classified technology," Wilcox explained. "Experimental medical devices being tested without proper oversight or approval. Still criminal, still dangerous, but not the horror story your wife believed." "And Lyle's death?" Wilcox's expression tightened. "Inconclusive. The investigation was mishandled from the start. We may never know with certainty." So Valerie's fear was based on partial information and assumptions, Wilcox finished. Lyle shared fragmented data with her before he died. She and Kendall apparently filled in the blanks with worst-case scenarios. The conversation left Dominic unsettled. If Valerie had truly believed her children were in danger, did that mitigate her betrayal? Or had she simply latched onto a convenient justification for choices she wanted to make anyway? He brought the new information to his attorney, Naomi Russo, a formidable litigator who had taken his case pro bono after hearing his story. "This actually strengthens our position," Russo assessed. Valerie's claims of imminent danger were exaggerated, based on speculation rather than fact. And it doesn't change the timeline of her relationship with Kendall. But if she genuinely believed the children were at risk, then she should have worked with authorities, not created elaborate false identities and told the children their father was dead, Russo said firmly. "Don't lose sight of what they did, Dominic." As the custody battle intensified, Kendall's influence became increasingly apparent. Valerie suddenly had access to legal resources far beyond what her declared income should allow. The children returned from visitations with expensive gifts and stories of promises for future adventures, subtle bribes that Dominic could never hope to match on a military salary. He's buying their loyalty, Dominic complained to Hawthorne during one of their now regular meetings. And it might be working, Hawthorne acknowledged. The Guardian ad litem mentioned that Quincy and Wren have both expressed wishes to spend more time with their mother and Kendall. They've been manipulated for years. Of course they're bonded to their captors. Hawthorne gave him a measured look. Be careful with that narrative in court. Whether we like it or not, the children had stability and apparent happiness in that household. Judges consider children's wishes, especially older ones like Quincy. The warning proved prescient. At the next custody hearing, the Guardian ad litem reported that the older children were struggling with the transition and had expressed preference for their previous living arrangement. They described Major Merritt as strict and always angry, she testified, while they refer to Mr. Kendall as understanding and fun. Dominic's attorney objected. Of course they prefer the man who's been bribing them with extravagant gifts and promises, while having none of the responsibility of actual parenting. The judge frowned. That characterization isn't helpful, counselor. Outside the courthouse, Dominic finally came face to face with Kendall without attorneys or police present. The older man approached him with surprising directness. This isn't working for the children, Kendall said quietly. Surely you can see that. Dominic's hands clenched at his sides. What I see is a man who helped steal my family and is now trying to keep them. I'm offering a compromise, Kendall continued, unruffled. My attorneys will propose a generous financial settlement and a co-parenting arrangement that gives you substantial time with the children while maintaining the stability they need. You're not their parent, Dominic growled. You don't get to co-parent anything. I've been their daily father figure for over 2 years, Kendall replied. That's reality, whether you accept it or not. And despite what you believe, I care deeply for them. Like you cared for my wife while I was deployed. Dominic shot back. Something like regret flickered across Kendall's composed features. That situation was complicated. But my concern for the children is genuine. Before Dominic could respond, Naomi Russo appeared at his side. Major Merritt won't be discussing anything without counsel present, she stated firmly. Any proposals can be submitted formally. As Kendall walked away, Russo turned to Dominic. Don't engage with him directly. Ever. He's too practiced at manipulation. That night, alone in his apartment while the children were with Valerie for their court-mandated visitation, Dominic faced the bitter reality of his situation. Despite the legal and moral weight on his side, he was losing the battle for his family. Kendall's resources seemed infinite. The children's memories of their life before the disappearance faded with each passing month, and the courts moved with excruciating slowness, allowing the status quo to solidify. As he sorted through a box of family mementos he'd preserved during the long absence, Dominic found a thumb drive he didn't recognize. Curious, he plugged it into his laptop. It contained a single video file labeled for Dom Insurance. The timestamp showed it had been created just weeks before Valerie's disappearance. The video showed Lyle Patterson, Valerie's brother, looking haggard and nervous. Dom, if you're watching this, something's happened to me, and maybe to Val and the kids too, he began. I've uncovered something ugly involving Sentinel Healthcare and military contracts. Prescott Kendall is right in the middle of it, though he's playing concerned citizen now. Dominic sat up straighter, pulse quickening. I don't trust him. He approached me after I started asking questions, claiming he wanted to help expose corruption. But I've found communications suggesting he's trying to contain the situation, not resolve it. Val doesn't see it. She thinks he's a white knight. Lyle ran a hand through his hair, visibly agitated. I've copied evidence to multiple locations. Val has one set, though she doesn't know everything it contains. I'm still piecing it together myself. But if something happens to me, don't trust Kendall. Whatever he tells you is shaped to protect himself first. The video ended abruptly, leaving Dominic staring at a blank screen. This changed everything. Lyle hadn't trusted Kendall, and he'd left this warning specifically for Dominic. But how had the drive gotten into his box of mementos? And why was he only finding it now? The answer came in a flash of memory. Anika, Valerie's friend who had first brought the video from Valerie. She had helped him pack up family items when he'd been deployed again during the search. She must have slipped it in then, perhaps uncertain what it contained, but following Lyle's instructions. Dominic immediately called Detective Hawthorne, who arrived within the hour to view the video. This directly contradicts Kendall's narrative, Hawthorne noted. If Lyle suspected him of being involved rather than helping, then Kendall might have had a motive beyond romance to keep Valerie and the children isolated, Dominic finished. They weren't just running from a nebulous threat, they were running from specific evidence that implicated him. And if Valerie eventually realized that, the implication hung in the air between them. Valerie might have become a liability to Kendall, a woman who possessed evidence that could damage him, raising 3 children who weren't his, a situation growing increasingly complex. The Switzerland trip, Dominic said suddenly. They were leaving the country when we found them. What if that wasn't just about avoiding detection? What if it was about getting them somewhere with no extradition? Hawthorne suggested. The theory was compelling but difficult to prove. The video alone, without the evidence Lyle mentioned, wouldn't be enough to bring charges against Kendall. But it might be enough to change the dynamics of the custody battle. We need to find Lyle's evidence, Dominic declared. He said he had copies in multiple locations. And Valerie has one set, Hawthorne reminded him. But if she's still protecting Kendall, she might not know what she has, Dominic realized. Lyle said she doesn't know everything it contains. With renewed purpose, they began re-examining Valerie's possessions that had been cataloged during the initial investigation. Among them was a collection of family photo albums she'd taken when she disappeared. Seemingly sentimental items, but perhaps something more. These were important enough for her to take while in fear for her life, Dominic noted. What if they're not just photos? They examined each album, looking for anything unusual. In the back cover of the oldest album, Dominic found it. A small irregularity in the binding, concealing a microSD card. This has to be it, he said, his hands trembling slightly as he extracted the tiny storage device. The card contained encrypted files that required specialized software to access. Once decrypted by the police technical team, they revealed a trove of information, financial records, emails, and internal memos from Sentinel Healthcare, all documenting not organ trafficking, but something arguably more insidious. The deliberate covering up of failed experimental medical treatments that had resulted in multiple deaths. And at the center of it all was Prescott Kendall, personally directing the containment strategy while publicly positioning himself as an advocate for medical ethics. This isn't just corporate malfeasance, Hawthorne said gravely. This is criminal negligence resulting in death. Multiple counts. For Dominic, the revelation brought a terrible clarity. He seduced my wife to control her, to monitor what she knew and keep her isolated from anyone who might help her understand what she had. And when that wasn't enough, he convinced her to disappear completely, Hawthorne added. Probably when he realized Lyle had given her evidence he couldn't account for. With the new evidence, the legal landscape shifted dramatically. Federal prosecutors opened an investigation into Sentinel Healthcare and Prescott Kendall personally. The custody case was temporarily stayed pending the outcome of these more serious criminal matters. Dominic, believing Valerie had also been Kendall's victim in some ways, approached her privately through their attorneys. I need to speak with her, he insisted. She needs to understand what's been happening. The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, with attorneys present but giving them space to talk. Valerie appeared thinner than he remembered, her eyes shadowed with worry. They're saying terrible things about Prescott, she began. Things that can't be true. I found Lyle's evidence, Dominic said gently. The real evidence, not just what Kendall wanted you to see. He explained what they'd discovered, showing her key documents that detailed Kendall's direct involvement in covering up medical deaths. He used you, Val, Dominic concluded. He saw you as Lyle's connection to evidence that could destroy him, and he made sure he controlled you completely. Valerie's face had drained of color. No, she whispered. He protected us. He loves me. He isolated you, cut you off from everyone, including me, made you entirely dependent on him. Is that love? Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know what to believe anymore. Believe Lyle, Dominic urged. Your brother tried to warn both of us. That's why he left me that video. Why he gave you evidence without telling you everything it contained. He was trying to protect you. Slowly, painfully, Valerie began to see the manipulation that had shaped the past 3 years of her life. The fear that had been cultivated and directed. The half-truths and omissions that had led her to make devastating choices. What happens now? She asked, her voice small. Kendall will likely face criminal charges, Dominic replied honestly. And you may too, for the kidnapping. But if you cooperate, if you help the prosecutors understand how he manipulated you. The children, she said suddenly. What will happen to them? That depends partly on you, Dominic said carefully. They need stability. They need parents who put their welfare first. I thought I was, Valerie whispered. I really thought I was protecting them. I know, Dominic acknowledged. And now you can protect them by helping them understand the truth, gently and with support. As they talked, a fragile understanding began to form between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a recognition that moving forward required focusing on the children's needs above all else. Will you fight me for full custody? Valerie asked eventually. I want what's best for them, Dominic replied. Right now, that's probably shared custody with extensive family therapy. They need both of us to help them process everything that's happened. The relief in Valerie's expression was palpable. I'll cooperate, she decided. With the prosecutors, with the custody arrangements, everything. I owe them that. I owe you that. As they prepared to leave, Valerie hesitated. There's something else you should know, she said quietly. About the trip to Switzerland. It wasn't just about avoiding detection. What was it about? Prescott was arranging for me to marry him there. He said it would make international custody issues simpler. She looked down at her hands. He also said it would make me immune from testifying against him if things ever went wrong. The final piece clicked into place. Kendall had been planning his legal protection all along, using Valerie and the children as both shields and leverage. Thank you for telling me, Dominic said simply. As he left the meeting, a weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. The path ahead remained difficult, but for the first time in years, he could see it clearly. Chapter 5, Countermoves. The federal investigation into Prescott Kendall progressed. Sentinel Healthcare's stock plummeted as details of the covered-up medical deaths became public. Former employees came forward with additional evidence, sensing which way the wind was blowing. Kendall himself remained outwardly composed, issuing statements through his attorneys expressing confidence that the misunderstanding would be resolved. He stepped down as CEO temporarily, citing the need to focus on his legal defense. For the Merritt family, the immediate impact was a strange limbo. With criminal charges pending against both Kendall and Valerie, the family court temporarily suspended its proceedings. The existing custody arrangement remained in place. The children lived primarily with Dominic, with supervised visitation for Valerie. Kendall was prohibited from contact with the children entirely. Dominic used this time to focus on rebuilding. He requested and received an administrative assignment at the Pentagon, allowing him to remain consistently present in his children's lives. He enrolled them in therapy, both individually and as a family. And he began the slow process of helping them understand the complex situation without demonizing their mother. Quincy remained the most difficult. At 12, he was old enough to piece together fragments of the adult world around him, but too young to fully comprehend the nuance and manipulation involved. So Mom's going to jail? He demanded one evening, his voice cracking with emotion. It's not that simple, Dominic replied carefully. Mom made some bad choices because she believed she was protecting you. The courts will take that into account. And Uncle Press? Is he a bad guy or not? Dominic chose his words. Prescott did some things in his business that hurt people, and he wasn't honest with your mom about them. But the way you felt about him, the good experiences you had, those were real. It was the hardest balance. Acknowledging the genuine relationships the children had formed during their time with Kendall without minimizing the wrongness of how those relationships came to be. On a rainy Tuesday, 6 weeks after the evidence came to light, Detective Hawthorne arrived at Dominic's apartment with troubling news. Kendall's gone, he said without preamble. Skipped bail this morning. His tracker was found in a hotel bathroom in Baltimore. Dominic felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. How? He was under surveillance. Expertly planned, Hawthorne admitted. He had a body double check into the hotel while wearing a hat and mask, COVID precautions. The double left the tracker in the bathroom and walked out while housekeeping was distracted. By the time the surveillance team realized something was wrong, Kendall had at least a 5-hour head start. Where would he go? Hawthorne's expression was grim. That's why I'm here. His private jet filed a flight plan to Mexico 2 days ago, with 3 passenger seats reserved. We think he was planning to take Valerie and the children. The implications were chilling. Despite the evidence against him, despite the pending charges, Kendall had still been plotting to reclaim the family he considered his. "Have you spoken to Valerie?" Dominic asked urgently. "She's being brought in for questioning now. Preliminary indications are that she wasn't aware of his plan. Her ankle monitor shows no unusual movements." Dominic ran a hand through his hair, mind racing. "The children, we need additional security." "Already arranged," Hawthorne assured him. "Officers are being stationed at their school and here. We've also gotten emergency orders restricting Valerie's visitation to a secure facility until Kendall is apprehended." For the next several weeks, the Merritt family lived under a protective shadow. The children were never alone, their movements carefully monitored. Dominic explained the situation as a security precaution without specifying that Kendall might attempt to take them again. Valerie, devastated by the revelation of Kendall's escape attempt, cooperated fully with authorities. She provided access to all communications, revealing that Kendall had indeed been subtly preparing her for another disappearance. "He told me the prosecution was politically motivated," she admitted to investigators. "That we'd never get a fair hearing. He made it sound reasonable, a strategic retreat until better legal representation could be arranged." The prosecutor handling her case, impressed by her cooperation and increasingly convinced of the psychological manipulation she had endured, began discussing a plea agreement that would significantly reduce her charges. 38 days after his disappearance, Prescott Kendall was located in a luxury villa outside Puerto Vallarta. Mexican authorities, working with U.S. Marshals, surrounded the property at dawn. Instead of surrendering, Kendall attempted to flee. In the ensuing chase, his vehicle careened off a cliff, exploding on the rocks below. When Hawthorne delivered the news, Dominic felt no satisfaction, only a complex relief. "Are they sure it's him?" "Dental records confirmed." Hawthorne nodded. "He's gone." The children received the news with varying reactions. Wren cried openly, mourning the man who had been a father figure to her for over 2 years. Porter, still young enough to adapt quickly, seemed more confused than grieved. And Quincy retreated into a sullen silence that concerned Dominic deeply. 3 days after Kendall's death, Dominic found Quincy sitting on the apartment balcony late at night, staring at the city lights. "Can't sleep?" Dominic asked gently, joining him. Quincy shrugged. Was he really as bad as everyone says? Dominic chose honesty. He did bad things in his business. People died because of decisions he made. And he manipulated your mom in ways that hurt our family deeply. But he was nice to us, Quincy insisted. He taught me chess. He helped with my science projects. He came to every school thing. "I know," Dominic acknowledged. "People are complicated, Quinn. Sometimes they can be good in some ways and very wrong in others. Mom says we would have died if he hadn't helped us." Dominic tensed. "When did she tell you that?" "Before, when we were still living with them. She said bad people were after us because of Uncle Lyle." "Your mom believed that," Dominic said carefully. "She was afraid and trying to protect you. But she didn't have all the information then. So we weren't really in danger?" Quincy challenged. "She lied about everything?" "It's more complicated than that," Dominic tried to explain. "Your mom had pieces of information that scared her. And Prescott encouraged those fears. He made them seem bigger and more immediate than they were." "Why would he do that?" Dominic sighed. "Because he wanted your mom to stay with him. And he knew if she wasn't afraid, she might have made different choices." Quincy absorbed this, his young face troubled. "So everything was fake? Our whole life there?" "Not everything," Dominic assured him. "Your mom's love for you was real. The good moments you remember were real. But the situation, the reasons you were there, those were based on manipulation and fear." As they sat together under the night sky, Dominic realized that true healing would require more than just physical safety or legal resolutions. It would mean helping his children integrate their conflicting experiences into a coherent understanding of their disrupted lives. With Kendall gone and Valerie cooperating with authorities, the legal machinery began moving again. The federal case against Sentinel Healthcare continued, with numerous executives facing charges. Valerie, in exchange for her testimony, received a plea agreement reducing her kidnapping charges to custodial interference with a sentence of probation and community service. The family court, presented with the full circumstances, ordered a graduated reunification plan. The children would continue living primarily with Dominic, with Valerie's visitation increasing progressively as she completed therapy and parenting classes. Most importantly, the court ordered comprehensive family therapy for all 5 of them together, Dominic, Valerie, and the 3 children, creating a structured environment to rebuild trust and communication. 6 months after Kendall's death, life had settled into a new normal. The children attended a private school with excellent counseling resources, funded by a victims' compensation fund from the Sentinel healthcare case. Dominic continued his Pentagon assignment, allowing him stable hours and presence in his children's lives. Valerie, living in a small apartment nearby, had found work as a bookkeeper again and attended every therapy session with genuine commitment. Progress came in small moments. Ren asking Dominic to read her favorite story, just as he had years before. Porter crawling into his lap during movie night without hesitation. Quincy reluctantly seeking his help with a difficult math assignment. And there were setbacks too. Tearful questions about why they couldn't all live together again. Angry outbursts when routines changed. Nightmares that sent the younger children seeking comfort in the middle of the night. Through it all, Dominic maintained a careful balance, acknowledging the harm without fostering bitterness, encouraging relationship with Valerie without ignoring her betrayal, helping the children process their grief for Kendall without either demonizing or idealizing him. It was exhausting, heartbreaking work. But slowly, thread by thread, the fabric of family began to reweave itself into something new. Not the seamless whole it had once been, but a patchwork of healing, honest in its imperfections. 1 year to the day after finding his family, Dominic sat in the family therapist's office for a private session. "You've come an extraordinary distance," Dr. Levinson observed. "All of you have. It doesn't always feel like it," Dominic admitted. "Some days it still feels like walking through quicksand." "Healing isn't linear," she reminded him. "But I've been doing this work for 20 years, and what you've accomplished with your children is remarkable. You've given them something invaluable, the ability to integrate their experiences without being defined by them." "I still get angry," Dominic confessed. "Not in front of them, but sometimes when I'm alone, I think about those lost years, the milestones I missed, the family memories stolen, and I get so angry I can't breathe." "That's human," Dr. Levinson assured him. "The question is what you do with that anger." "I use it," Dominic said after a moment's reflection, "to be a better father, to be more present now, to make sure they always know they're loved and safe." Dr. Levinson smiled. "That's why you're succeeding. You've transformed your pain into protection without passing it on to them." As he left the office, Dominic's phone buzzed with a text from Valerie. "Quincy got the lead in the school play. He asked if we could both take him for ice cream to celebrate. Okay with you?" Dominic typed back, "Absolutely. Pick you up at 5. It wasn't the life he had imagined, nor the family as it once was. But as he drove to collect his excited son and the woman who had once been his wife, Dominic recognized that they were building something with honesty that the old family had lacked. And in that, despite everything, there was hope. Chapter 6. Ghosts Resurfacing. 18 months after recovering his family, Dominic Merritt awoke to a notification that would shatter their fragile new normal. A simple email, subject line, "About PK, urgent." The sender address was unfamiliar, but the message was chilling in its brevity. "He's not dead. The dental records were faked. I can prove it. We need to meet. Your family is still in danger." Attached was a grainy security camera image dated 2 weeks earlier, showing a man with Kendall's distinctive profile entering a building in Singapore. Dominic stared at the screen, blood rushing in his ears. After everything, the investigation, the confirmation of death, the slow, painful healing, could Prescott Kendall truly still be alive? He immediately called Detective Hawthorne, who responded with appropriate skepticism. "We had positive dental record identification," Hawthorne reminded him. "That's not easily faked. Unless you have access to medical record systems," Dominic countered. "Which Sentinel Healthcare certainly did." "Let me see this image," Hawthorne requested. After reviewing the attachment, Hawthorne admitted the resemblance was striking but maintained caution. "It could be doctored, or someone with similar features. Let me run it through our facial recognition before you do anything." "And if it is him?" Dominic pressed. Hawthorne's voice grew serious. "Then we reopen everything." "But Dominic, don't reach out to this source alone. It could be a trap." Despite the warning, Dominic couldn't dismiss the message. If there was even a slight possibility that Kendall had faked his death and might still pose a threat to his family, he needed to know. With the children safely at school and no immediate visitation scheduled with Valerie, Dominic replied to the email. I need more evidence. Who are you? How did you get this information? The response came within minutes. Brian E. Williams, former executive assistant to PK. I've been tracking financial movements that don't align with a dead man. In person only from here. St. Elmo's Coffee, 2 p.m. today. Come alone. Dominic remembered Bryony, the assistant who had first confirmed his family was with Kendall, who had later provided the emails that revealed their pre-existing relationship. Her involvement lent credibility to the claim. Against better judgment, he agreed to the meeting, but took precautions. He notified Hawthorne of his plans and arranged for a colleague to monitor from a distance. St. Elmo's was busy with afternoon patrons when Dominic arrived. Bryony was already seated in a corner booth, her appearance dramatically different from their previous meeting. Her once sleek dark hair was now short and bleached blonde. She wore oversized sunglasses indoors and continuously scanned the room. Thank you for coming, she said as he sat down across from her. I've been debating whether to contact you for months. Explain, Dominic said simply. Bryony pushed a folder across the table. After PK supposedly died, I was responsible for handling certain personal effects and accounts. I noticed irregularities, transfers to numbered accounts that occurred after his death. When I looked deeper, I found a pattern of preparations dating back months before his disappearance. The folder contained bank statements, property records, and travel documentation, all suggesting elaborate contingency planning. He created an entirely new identity, Bryony explained. Alexander Whitfield, British national, with a complete paper trail going back decades. I only found it because I recognized his handwriting on a personal notation in a file I was clearing. And the dental records? Dominic asked. Sentinel maintains medical data for hundreds of healthcare networks. Finding someone with a similar dental structure and substituting the records would be challenging, but not impossible for someone with his access level. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Bryony's expression darkened. Because 3 former Sentinel executives connected to the original investigation have died in accidents in the past 4 months. And because I found documentation suggesting he's been monitoring your family. She slid another paper forward, a printout of recent surveillance photos. Dominic recognized the images immediately. Ren at soccer practice, Quincy walking home from school, Porter at the neighborhood playground. And most disturbing, Valerie entering her apartment building. These were taken within the last 30 days, Bryony stated. He has people watching all of you. Dominic's military training kicked in, pushing down the panic to focus on immediate security. Why would he risk exposure after successfully disappearing? Revenge, perhaps, Bryony suggested. Or unfinished business. But knowing him as I did, I suspect it's about possession. He considered your family his. Men like Prescott don't surrender what they believe belongs to them. Have you taken this to the authorities? Bryony laughed bitterly. With what credibility? I was his right hand for years. I could easily be implicated in his schemes. And more importantly, I don't know who might be compromised. Prescott maintained relationships with officials at many levels. As they spoke, Dominic noticed a man at the counter who seemed unnaturally interested in their conversation. When the man briefly turned, revealing an earpiece, Dominic's instincts flared. We need to leave, he said quietly. Now, separate directions. Without waiting for a response, he stood and moved casually toward the restrooms, then slipped out the back exit. Bryony, to her credit, waited 30 seconds before departing through the front door. Dominic circled the block, ensuring he wasn't followed, before calling his Pentagon security contact. I need immediate protection detail for my children and ex-wife, he explained. Potential high-level threat. Authorization code Sierra 9. Within an hour, plainclothes security personnel were positioned at the children's school and Valerie's workplace. Dominic himself went directly to Detective Hawthorne's office, where he laid out Bryony's evidence. Hawthorne reviewed the materials with growing concern. Some of this could be fabricated, he noted. But the surveillance photos worry me. Those are definitely recent and authentic. I need to move my family, Dominic decided. Somewhere secure until this is resolved. If Kendall is alive and has the resources Bryony suggests, nowhere is truly secure, Hawthorne warned. We need to draw him out, confirm his existence, and end this threat permanently. Using my family as bait is not an option, Dominic stated flatly. Not as bait, Hawthorne clarified, but perhaps as a calculated maneuver. Make him think he has an opportunity while actually leading him into a trap. The plan they devised was risky but controlled. They would create the appearance of a vulnerability, a family trip to a remote cabin, while actually placing the family in a secure military facility. The cabin would be staffed with operatives waiting to apprehend anyone who approached. Valerie, when informed of the situation, was initially disbelieving. "It's not possible," she insisted, her face pale. "I identified his body myself." "You identified remains after an explosion and fire," Dominic reminded her gently, "with dental records as the only concrete evidence." "But why would he?" Her voice trailed off as realization dawned. "The timing. It was right after I started cooperating with prosecutors." "Exactly," Dominic confirmed. "He realized you were no longer under his control, that you might reveal everything." As the implications sank in, Valerie's expression shifted from shock to resolve. "What do you need me to do?" "We create a digital trail suggesting a family reconciliation attempt," Dominic explained. "A weekend away to work on co-parenting. Make it seem like the kind of vulnerable situation he might exploit. Using ourselves as bait," Valerie summarized, her voice steady. "Not exactly," Dominic clarified. "You and the children will be at Fort Belvoir the entire time, under military protection. The cabin will be staffed with operatives." "He won't believe I'd agree to an isolated location with you," Valerie pointed out. "Not after everything. He knows me too well." "That's why the scenario needs to be carefully constructed," Dominic acknowledged. "A neutral third party suggesting it. Documentation of therapy recommendations. Social media evidence of gradual reconciliation." The operation took 3 weeks to prepare. During that time, security remained vigilant around the family. The children, told only that they would be staying on a military base for a special program, remained unaware of the potential threat. As they laid the groundwork, Dominic repeatedly studied the surveillance photos Bryony had provided. Something about them nagged at him, a pattern he couldn't quite identify. The answer came during a restless night, when he realized the angles of the photos indicated all surveillance was conducted from public spaces. No private property had been accessed, no close-range images captured. Whoever was watching his family was maintaining legal distance. "He's being cautious," Dominic told Hawthorne, "not risking any action that could trigger legal intervention." "Which supports our approach," Hawthorne noted. "He'll wait for what he perceives as the perfect opportunity, one that seems legitimate and safe." The digital trail was carefully laid. A family counselor's email recommending a neutral environment for co-parenting discussions, a cabin rental in Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains under Valerie's name, credit card purchases of hiking gear for the children, a social media post from Valerie expressing cautious hope about new beginnings. 2 days before the supposed trip, Bryony reported movement in the Alexander Whitfield identity, a private jet filing a flight plan from Singapore to a private airfield in West Virginia, just 90 minutes from the cabin location. "It's working," she confirmed. "He's coming himself, not sending operatives." On the day of the operation, Dominic personally escorted Valerie and the children to Fort Belvoir, where comfortable quarters had been arranged in the officers' housing area. To maintain the deception, Valerie continued normal social media activity, suggesting preparation for the mountain trip. Dominic then joined the team at the actual cabin for operatives from military intelligence, 2 U.S. Marshals, and Detective Hawthorne. The property was wired with surveillance equipment, and personnel were positioned strategically in and around the structure. "If he approaches, we take him alive," Hawthorne instructed. "We need his testimony to unravel whatever remains of his operation." The first day passed without incident. On the second morning, movement sensors on the property perimeter alerted the team to an approaching vehicle. "Single SUV, coming up the access road," the surveillance officer reported. "Tinted windows, rental tags." Dominic watched the monitors as the vehicle parked at a discreet distance from the cabin. A single figure emerged, tall, silver-haired, moving with the confident bearing he remembered. "Visual confirmation," Hawthorne said quietly. "Prescott Kendall." Kendall approached cautiously, surveying the property. He carried what appeared to be an expensive bottle of wine, a housewarming gift that might explain his presence if challenged. The perfect cover for a supposedly chance encounter. As he reached the porch steps, Hawthorne gave the signal. Within seconds, operatives converged from all directions. Kendall's expression shifted from surprise to calculation to resignation as he slowly raised his hands. "Prescott Kendall," Hawthorne announced formally, approaching with handcuffs. "You're under arrest for faking your death, violating bail conditions, and multiple counts of corporate fraud and negligent homicide." Kendall's composed facade never cracked. "I think you're mistaking me for someone else," he replied smoothly. "My name is Alexander Whitfield. I'm simply delivering a welcome gift to new neighbors." "Save it," Hawthorne responded. "Facial recognition has already confirmed your identity, and we have the paper trail of your escape and new identity creation." As the marshals took Kendall into custody, he locked eyes with Dominic. "Major merit," he acknowledged, his voice betraying no emotion. "You surprise me. I wouldn't have expected this level of creativity from you." "You misjudged me," Dominic replied evenly, "just as you misjudged Valerie, eventually seeing through your manipulation." Something like genuine regret flickered across Kendall's features. "How are the children?" "Healing," Dominic said simply. "No thanks to you." As Kendall was led away, Dominic felt not triumph, but a profound relief, the closing of a chapter that had nearly destroyed his family. The aftermath unfolded with surprising swiftness. With Kendall alive and in custody, his remaining assets were frozen. Former associates, realizing he could no longer protect or threaten them, provided additional evidence of his crimes. The final death toll from Sentinel's covered-up medical failures was established at 27 patients. Bryony Williams received immunity in exchange for her cooperation and entered witness protection. Valerie, now fully recognized as another of Kendall's victims, had all remaining charges against her dismissed. In a private moment before Kendall's arraignment, Valerie requested to see him, a request both Dominic and the prosecutors initially opposed. "I need this," she insisted, "for my own healing, to face him knowing the truth." The meeting was arranged with strict security protocols. Dominic, at Valerie's request, watched from an adjacent room. Kendall, in prison attire but still somehow maintaining his dignified bearing, smiled when Valerie entered. "Valentine," he greeted her, using the name from her false identity. "My name is Valerie," she corrected firmly. "Valentine was a fiction you helped create." "Not entirely," he responded. "The woman I knew had more strength and decisiveness than the military wife I first met." "The woman you manipulated," Valerie clarified. "The woman whose fear you exploited. The woman you convinced to destroy her family and traumatize her children." Kendall's expression hardened slightly. "I protected you when you believed you were in danger. I gave your children stability and opportunities. After helping create the danger in the first place," Valerie shot back. "Lal suspected you all along, didn't he? He tried to warn me, but I was already too deep in your manipulation to see it." "Lal was misguided," Kendall stated flatly, "looking for conspiracies where there were only business decisions." "Business decisions that killed people," Valerie said, "including, perhaps, my brother." For the first time, Kendall's composure wavered. "I had nothing to do with Lyle's accident." "I don't believe you," Valerie replied simply. "I don't believe anything you've ever told me. And I came here today to tell you that you failed. My children are healing. They're rebuilding their relationship with their real father. And I'm finally free of the fear you cultivated in me." Kendall studied her, his expression unreadable. "You never would have been happy as just a military wife, Valerie. I recognized something in you that Dominic never did. Ambition, capacity for more. What you recognized was vulnerability you could exploit," Valerie corrected. "And what you never understood about Dominic is that he always supported my choices. He never needed to shape me into something else to love me." As she turned to leave, Kendall called after her. "They still ask about me, don't they? The children? They still remember?" Valerie paused at the door. "They remember being lied to," she said quietly. "They're learning about manipulation and coercion. And someday, when they're old enough to understand everything, they'll know exactly who you really were." Watching from the adjacent room, Dominic felt a weight he hadn't even recognized lifting from his shoulders. Valerie had found her voice, her clarity. She had faced her manipulator and recognized the mechanisms of his control. Kendall's trial proceeded with extensive media coverage. The man who had once been a celebrated healthcare innovator was revealed as a ruthless executive who had knowingly allowed patients to die rather than acknowledge failures in experimental treatments. His manipulation of Valerie and the children became a secondary but compelling narrative in the public's understanding of his character. In the end, Prescott Kindle was sentenced to 27 years in federal prison, 1 year for each death attributed to the covered-up medical failures. Additional charges related to faking his death and fleeing justice added another 15 years, effectively ensuring he would spend the remainder of his life incarcerated. For the Merritt family, Kindle's conviction provided a definitive ending to their ordeal. The children, initially sheltered from the most disturbing details, were gradually helped to understand the truth in age-appropriate ways. Was Uncle Press a bad person all along? Wren asked during a family therapy session. People aren't all good or all bad. The therapist explained gently. Prescott did some very harmful things, but he also had positive qualities. What's important is understanding that the situation you were in wasn't honest or healthy, even when it sometimes felt good. As weeks became months, the family settled into a new configuration. Dominic maintained primary custody, but Valerie's role expanded as she demonstrated consistent growth in therapy. The co-parenting relationship, once seemingly impossible, became functional and eventually respectful. 2 years after Kindle's capture, Dominic received a promotion to lieutenant colonel and a teaching position at West Point, a role that offered stability and predictability for the children. He purchased a comfortable home near the academy, with enough space for the children to grow and for Valerie to stay in a guest room during her extended visits. On a crisp autumn evening, as they sat on the porch watching the children play in the yard, Valerie turned to Dominic with unexpected tears in her eyes. "I never properly apologized," she said quietly, "for believing the worst of you, for taking them away, for all of it." "You've apologized many times," Dominic reminded her, "and we've moved forward. But I never asked if you've forgiven me," Valerie persisted. "Because I'm not sure I could, in your position." Dominic considered the question seriously. "Forgiveness isn't a single moment," he said finally. "It's a process. There are still days I feel angry about the time I lost with them. But then I look at where we are now, at how far we've all come, and I choose to focus on that instead." Valerie nodded, understanding the careful truth in his words. "They're lucky to have you, to have always had you, even when they didn't know it." As they watched their children playing, Quincy now a thoughtful teenager, Wren growing more confident daily, Porter barely remembering a time before their reunited life, Dominic reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The desperate search, the painful revelations, the careful rebuilding. They were not the family they had once been. The fractures would always be visible, the healing imperfect. But they had found something possibly more valuable than seamless wholeness. A resilience forged through adversity, an honesty born of confronting painful truths, and a love tested by the worst, and still, somehow, enduring. Chapter 7. Reconstructing Lives. 5 years after Prescott Kindle's conviction, the Merritt family had established a new normal that would have seemed impossible in the chaotic aftermath of their reunion. Lieutenant Colonel Dominic Merritt had settled into his role at West Point, respected by colleagues and cadets alike for his technical expertise and quiet leadership. At 45, the silver at his temples and lines around his eyes were marks of the journey he'd traveled, but the haunted look that had once characterized him had faded. Valerie, now 43, had rebuilt her life with determined focus. After completing her accounting degree, she secured a position with a nonprofit organization that supported military families in crisis, work that seemed fitting given her unique perspective on family trauma. She lived in her own home 20 minutes from Dominic's, allowing her to be actively involved in the children's daily lives while maintaining healthy boundaries. The children themselves had grown remarkably. Quincy, now 17 and a high school senior, had developed into a thoughtful young man with his father's analytical mind and his mother's emotional intelligence. His early resentment had evolved into a nuanced understanding of the complex circumstances that had fractured his family. College applications occupied much of his time, with engineering programs as his focus. Wren, 15, had blossomed into a confident teenager with artistic talents and a wide social circle. Initially the most visibly traumatized by the family's disruption, she had found expression through painting and music, processing her experiences through creative outlets her parents encouraged. Porter, 13, retained the least direct memory of the separation but had absorbed its impacts nonetheless. Sensitive and observant, he often mediated between his siblings and served as the family's emotional barometer. His passion for science had recently crystallized into an interest in psychology, perhaps influenced by the therapy that had been part of his life for as long as he could remember. The co-parenting relationship between Dominic and Valerie had evolved from tense formality to genuine collaboration. They weren't friends, exactly, but they had achieved a mutual respect and shared purpose that transcended their painful history. On a warm September evening, the family gathered for what had become a tradition, a start-of-school-year dinner where achievements were celebrated and goals for the coming year discussed. These gatherings typically included Valerie, creating a space where the children could experience their parents as a unified support system rather than opposing forces. Harvard sent a recruitment letter, Quincy announced casually, passing a salad bowl to his sister. Dominic raised an eyebrow. That's significant. Are you interested? Quincy shrugged with studied nonchalance. Maybe. Their engineering program is excellent, but so is MIT's. And Stanford's. All far from home, Valerie observed quietly. That's kind of the point of college, Mom. Quincy replied, though his tone held gentleness rather than rebuke. The conversation flowed naturally to Ren's upcoming art show and Porter's science project, parents offering support and siblings good-natured teasing. To an outside observer, they might have appeared like any family. The history of trauma and separation invisible beneath the ordinary dynamics of daily life. After dinner, as the children dispersed to homework and social media, Dominic and Valerie lingered over coffee on the back deck. Quincy's really considering Harvard? Valerie asked. Apparently, Dominic confirmed. His grades and test scores make it realistic. Valerie traced the rim of her cup thoughtfully. It's strange to think of him being independent. Sometimes I still see him as that scared 12-year-old. He's ready, Dominic said with quiet confidence. They all are, for their respective stages. We've made sure of that. You've made sure of that, Valerie corrected. I'm under no illusions about who provided the stability they needed. Dominic shook his head. It's been both of us, Val. Different roles, but equally important. The easy use of her nickname, something that had returned gradually over the years, signified how far they had come from the bitter recriminations of the early days. Their conversation was interrupted by Dominic's phone. Seeing Hawthorne's name on the screen, he felt a reflexive tension. Even after 5 years, contact from the detective triggered memories of uncertainty and threat. Silas, he answered. Everything all right? Just checking in, Hawthorne replied, his voice warm. Though officially retired now, he had maintained contact with the Merritt family, his involvement in their case having evolved into something like friendship. Wanted to give you a heads up on something that might hit the news. Kendall is being transferred to a different facility next week. Dominic stiffened. Why? Is there a security concern? No, nothing like that, Hawthorne assured him. Medical reasons. Apparently, he's been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's. The new facility has better specialized care. The news landed strangely. Not satisfaction at Kendall's suffering, but a complex recognition of how thoroughly their paths had diverged. While the Merritts had rebuilt their lives, Kendall's had contracted to the confines of incarceration, now further constrained by physical decline. I appreciate the warning, Dominic said. Better that we hear it from you than see it unexpectedly. After the call, he relayed the information to Valerie, whose expression remained neutral. Does it still affect you? He asked. Hearing about him? Valerie considered the question carefully. Not like it once did. It's more like hearing about a character from a book I read long ago. I recognize the name, but the emotional connection has faded. Her answer resonated with Dominic's own experience. Kendall had once loomed as an omnipresent threat, then an active adversary, and finally a vanquished opponent. Now he seemed increasingly irrelevant to their lived reality, a footnote rather than a defining chapter. Their peaceful evening was disrupted hours later when Dominic received another call, this time from a security contact at the Pentagon. Colonel Merritt. The voice was clipped, professional. We have a situation requiring your immediate attention. A file has been delivered to military intelligence with your name specifically flagged. What kind of file? Dominic asked, instantly alert. Digital records related to the Sentinel healthcare case and subsequent events. The delivery method was unusual. A law firm received instructions from a trust activated upon specific medical conditions being confirmed. Your security clearance has been temporarily elevated to review the materials. By morning, Dominic was in a secure room at the Pentagon, facing a comprehensive archive of Prescott Kendall's operations, far more extensive than what had been uncovered during the original investigation. The files documented not only the medical fraud that had led to his initial prosecution, but a network of influence and corruption extending into government contracts, regulatory agencies, and international healthcare systems. Most disturbingly, the files confirmed what had long been suspected but never proven. Lyle Patterson's training accident had indeed been orchestrated to silence his investigation. He created a dead man's switch, the intelligence officer explained, set to activate if he was ever diagnosed with certain conditions that might affect his cognitive abilities. Parkinson's was among them. But why send it to us now? Dominic questioned. What purpose does it serve him? The accompanying letter might explain, the officer suggested, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. The letter, handwritten on expensive stationery, was addressed simply to the Merritt family. I find myself facing an unwelcome reckoning with mortality sooner than anticipated. While I maintain that many of my business decisions were justified by market realities, I acknowledge that my actions toward your family crossed boundaries no rationalization can justify. The enclosed files provide a complete accounting of matters pertaining to Sentinel Healthcare, including the regrettable circumstances of Lyle Patterson's death. I did not order his elimination, but I became aware of it after the fact and failed to expose those responsible, a moral failure for which I have had ample time to reflect. Regarding Valerie and the children, I offer no excuses. What began as strategic containment evolved into something more personal, and I allowed that personal interest to justify inexcusable manipulations. This is not an appeal for forgiveness, which would be presumptuous given the harm caused. Rather, it is an acknowledgement of accountability that the legal process, for all its thoroughness, could not fully extract. The trust delivering these files has also established educational foundations for Quincy, Wren, and Porter, structured such that they cannot be rejected without forfeiting substantial charitable donations to veterans organizations. Consider it restitution, not absolution. Prescott Kendall. Dominic sat with the letter for a long time, emotions cycling through him too rapidly to process. The confirmation of Lyle's murder. The admission of manipulation. The complicated gesture of the educational trusts, creating an ethical dilemma where accepting meant acknowledging Kendall's final attempt to influence their lives, while rejecting meant denying the children opportunities and worthy causes support. When he finally returned home, Dominic found Valerie waiting in his living room, having been contacted separately by the law firm administering Kendall's trust. "Have you read it?" she asked, holding up her own copy of the letter. Dominic nodded and reviewed the files. They confirm everything about Lyle. Everyone involved has been identified. Valerie pressed her fingers to her lips, tears welling. All this time, I thought I was paranoid, that I'd exaggerated the danger in my mind to justify what I did. But he really was murdered. You were right about the threat, Dominic acknowledged. Just wrong about who was behind it. They sat in silence, absorbing the implications of this final revelation. For Valerie, it represented a complex validation. Her fear had been justified, though Kendall had exploited and misdirected it. For Dominic, it resolved lingering questions about the extent of the conspiracy that had torn his family apart. What about the trust funds? Valerie finally asked. Do we accept them? I don't know, Dominic admitted. It feels like allowing him one last manipulation. But denying the children opportunities out of principle seems equally wrong. We should decide together, Valerie suggested. All 5 of us. The children are old enough to understand the implications and have a voice in this. The family council convened the following evening. With careful consideration for their ages and emotional readiness, Dominic and Valerie explained the situation, presenting Kendall's letter and the choice before them. Quincy, nearly an adult and most deeply affected by the family's disruption, spoke first. So he's trying to buy forgiveness with college funds. I don't think he expects forgiveness, Dominic clarified. He says as much in the letter. Then why do it? Wren questioned. What does he get out of it? Perhaps a sense of resolution, Valerie suggested. He's facing his mortality and trying to address unfinished business. Porter, thoughtful as always, considered the veterans organizations that would benefit if they declined. So either we get the money for college or veterans get help. It's like he's forcing us to choose between ourselves and others. Classic manipulation, Quincy observed bitterly. One last power play. The discussion continued for hours, each family member expressing their perspective. Emotions ran high at times. Anger at Kendall's presumption, confusion about the ethical implications, practical considerations about educational costs. What if we accept the funds, but donate portions ourselves? Ren proposed eventually. Use what we need for education, but ensure the veterans' organizations benefit too. A compromise, Dominic reflected, taking control of his gesture rather than simply accepting or rejecting it. And we attach no gratitude to it, Quincy added firmly. It's not a gift. It's a partial repayment for damage done. The consensus that emerged reflected their journey as a family, acknowledging the harm done without allowing it to dictate their future choices, finding a path forward that honored both practical needs and ethical principles. As the children dispersed to their rooms, Valerie lingered with Dominic in the kitchen. They're wise beyond their years, she observed. More balanced about this than I expected. They've had to process complex realities most kids never face, Dominic replied. It's brought a maturity that's sometimes heartbreaking to see. Do you ever wonder who they might have been without all this? Valerie asked softly. If our family had remained intact, if none of this had happened? Dominic considered the question carefully. Sometimes. But I've also come to believe that who they are now, their compassion, their resilience, their understanding of human complexity, those are qualities forged in part through these experiences. Not that it justifies what happened, but they've integrated it into their identities in remarkable ways. Valerie nodded, understanding the nuance in his perspective. I used to torture myself imagining the alternate timeline, the path where I didn't make those terrible choices. But lately I've been trying to focus on who we are now, not who we might have been. That's all any of us can do, Dominic agreed. Honor the past without being trapped by it. The following weeks brought practical arrangements as the Merritt family implemented their decision regarding Kendall's trust. The funds were accepted with specific conditions, partial donations to veterans organizations, transparent accounting, and no naming rights or recognition for Kendall himself. Alongside these pragmatic matters, the confirmation of Lyle's murder prompted a renewed investigation. The files Kendall provided identified 3 former Sentinel executives who had arranged the accident after learning of Lyle's discoveries. Federal prosecutors, armed with this new evidence, pursued charges against individuals who had escaped the original investigation. For Valerie, this represented a bittersweet vindication. Her brother's death was finally recognized as the crime it had been, though justice came too late for Lyle himself to witness. The family attended the arraignment of the primary conspirator together, a show of unity that honored Lyle's memory and brought a measure of closure to a chapter that had shaped their lives so dramatically. As they left the courthouse, Quincy walked beside his father, unusually contemplative. I've been thinking about what kind of man I want to be, he said suddenly. Seeing all this, the consequences of choices made years ago still playing out. Dominic glanced at his son, recognizing the weight of his thoughts. That's a profound consideration. I used to be so angry, Quincy continued. At Mom for taking us away. At you for not finding us sooner. At Kendall for inserting himself into our lives. Even at myself for adapting to each situation. That anger was natural, Dominic assured him. You were processing trauma. I know, Quincy acknowledged. But I've realized something recently. The anger was about the past, things I couldn't change. But who I become is about the future. That's still in my control. Dominic felt a surge of pride at his son's insight. That's wisdom many adults never achieve. I had good examples, Quincy said simply. Watching you rebuild your life without becoming bitter. Seeing Mom take responsibility and change. Even understanding Kendall as a cautionary tale of intelligence without ethics. As father and son walked together, Dominic reflected on the long journey that had brought them to this point. The desperate search, the painful revelations, the cautious rebuilding. The scars remained, visible in moments of hesitation or flashes of old pain, but they had healed enough to allow forward movement. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner in what had become their blended routine, sometimes at Dominic's home, sometimes at Valerie's, the children moving comfortably between both, Dominic surveyed the scene with quiet gratitude. Not for what had happened, which could never be truly justified, but for what they had managed to salvage and reconstruct from the aftermath. They were not the family they might have been in that alternate timeline Valerie had mentioned, but they were a family nonetheless, complex, resilient, and remarkably intact despite everything. Chapter 8. Echoes and Reverberations. 7 years after Prescott Kendall's conviction, as the Merritt family settled into what had finally begun to feel like genuine stability, the past resurfaced in an unexpected form. Dominic, now Colonel Merritt and serving as head of strategic operations at West Point, received a call from Bryony Williams, the former assistant whose evidence had been crucial in confirming Kendall's deception. "I need to see you," she said without preamble. "There's something you should know." They arranged to meet at a quiet restaurant in Manhattan, away from the familiar environments of both their lives. Bryony arrived looking dramatically different from the anxious whistleblower Dominic remembered. Now in her early 40s, she carried herself with a confident poise that spoke of hard-won self-assurance. "Thank you for coming," she began, after they had exchanged brief pleasantries. "I've been debating whether to contact you for months." "What's this about?" Dominic asked directly. Bryony placed a leather portfolio on the table between them. "After entering witness protection, I changed careers entirely. I now work as a specialized researcher for an investigative journalism organization. Recently, we've been examining international medical research networks, and I found something concerning." She opened the portfolio, revealing documents with familiar letterhead, Sentinel Healthcare. "The company itself was dismantled after Kendall's conviction," she explained. "But certain research divisions were acquired by other corporations. One particular division, specializing in regenerative medicine, was purchased by a Swiss conglomerate. That division is still utilizing research protocols developed under Kendall's direction." "Is that illegal?" Dominic asked. Unethical research methods were part of the prosecution, but the technology itself wasn't necessarily invalidated. "The technology isn't the issue," Bryony clarified. "It's the personnel. Several key researchers from Sentinel's most questionable projects are now in leadership positions at the Swiss operation, and the funding structure suggests continuation of the same practices that led to patient deaths originally." Dominic studied the documents with growing concern. "Why bring this to me? This seems like a matter for regulatory authorities." "Because your name appears in their security protocols," Bryony said quietly, "along with Valerie's and your children's. The organization maintains active surveillance on your family." The revelation landed like a physical blow. After years of building a sense of safety, the idea that they were still being monitored, still considered relevant to Kendall's former associates, was profoundly disturbing. "Are you certain?" Dominic asked, his military training keeping his voice steady despite the alarm coursing through him. Bryony nodded grimly. "The surveillance isn't constant, but periodic assessments are conducted. The most recent was 3 months ago." "Why?" Dominic pressed. "Kendall is incarcerated. His health is declining. What possible threat could my family pose to these people now?" "I believe it relates to the evidence Kendall provided after his diagnosis," Bryony theorized. "Those files implicated specific individuals, but didn't expose the entire network. There's concern that additional evidence might emerge through your family." Dominic thought of Lyle's hidden files, of the fragments of information Valerie had possessed without fully understanding. Could there still be missing pieces that these people feared might surface? "I need to protect my family," he said, the simplicity of the statement belying the complexity of what it might require. "That's why I came to you directly," Bryony acknowledged. "Official channels might be compromised. Several regulatory officials who should be monitoring these operations have unexplained financial irregularities in their backgrounds." As they discussed the implications, Dominic formulated a preliminary strategy. This was not the panicked response of the desperate father he had been when his family first disappeared, but the calculated assessment of a military strategist with extensive security experience. "I'll need everything you have on their surveillance methods and personnel," he stated. "And I'll need to approach this carefully to avoid creating unnecessary fear for my family." Bryony slid a flash drive across the table. "All my research is here. I've also included contact information for trusted journalists who could publish if something happens to either of us. Insurance policy," she added with a grim smile. Before leaving, Dominic asked the question that had lingered since her call. "Why are you still involved in this? You could have walked away completely after the trial." Bryony considered the question thoughtfully. "I was complicit for years," she said finally. "Not actively, but through silence and accommodation. I justified it as just doing my job. This is my atonement, in a way. Returning to West Point, Dominic faced a difficult decision: how much to share with his family. Quincy was now in his second year at MIT, building a new life away from the shadow of their past. Ren was 17, preparing for college applications herself. Porter, 15, was thriving in high school. And Valerie had recently begun a serious relationship after years of focusing solely on rebuilding her life and relationship with her children. Disturbing their hard-won normalcy with new threats seemed cruel. Yet keeping them ignorant of potential danger was equally problematic. He called a former colleague from military intelligence, now working in private security consulting. I need a comprehensive security assessment, Dominic explained, for multiple locations and individuals. Discreetly, within days, enhanced but unobtrusive security measures were implemented around both Dominic's and Valerie's homes. The children's digital footprints were secured with advanced protocols. Surveillance detection systems were installed to alert Dominic if anyone was monitoring his family. Only after these precautions were in place did he approach Valerie, requesting a private meeting without the children present. They sat in her kitchen, the space where they had rebuilt their co-parenting relationship through countless discussions about the children's needs and progress. Something's happened, Valerie intuited immediately, reading his expression with the familiarity of their long history. Dominic nodded, then carefully explained what Bryony had discovered. Valerie listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. After all this time, she said finally, will it ever truly be over? This isn't like before, Dominic assured her. We're not vulnerable in the same ways. We have resources, knowledge, support systems. I've already implemented security measures. Should we tell the children? Valerie asked, the question that had weighed on him as well. Quincy, yes, Dominic decided. He's an adult now and needs to be aware when he returns for breaks. Ren and Porter, I'm less certain. I don't want to re-traumatize them if this turns out to be precautionary rather than an active threat. Valerie considered this, then nodded slowly. We tell Quincy everything. For Ren and Porter, perhaps a modified version, additional security as a routine update rather than response to a specific threat. Their unified approach reflected the strength of the co-parenting relationship they had built from the ashes of their marriage. Despite everything, they had found a way to prioritize their children's well-being while respecting each other's perspectives. The next phase involved deeper investigation into the Swiss operation Bryony had identified. Using his military contacts and her journalistic resources, they began mapping the network's structure and activities. What emerged was concerning. The organization had indeed continued Sentinel's most questionable research practices, now operating in jurisdictions with limited regulatory oversight. More troublingly, they uncovered evidence that the operation maintained connections to individuals implicated in Lyle's murder, individuals who had escaped prosecution due to insufficient evidence before Kendall's revelations. This isn't just about protecting research methods or avoiding regulatory consequences, Dominic realized during a secure video call with Bryony. These people are protecting themselves from potential criminal charges, which makes them more dangerous, Bryony agreed. People facing prison tend to make desperate choices. The investigation gained unexpected momentum when Quincy, now informed of the situation, contributed his technical expertise during a break from MIT. Their security systems have vulnerabilities, he explained, showing Dominic and Bryony what he had discovered through entirely legal information gathering. Their network architecture leaves digital fingerprints we can track to identify their surveillance methods. With Quincy's insights, they confirmed that the surveillance on the Merritt family was indeed periodic rather than constant, conducted through a combination of digital monitoring and occasional physical observation during predictable public appearances. They're assessing rather than targeting, Dominic concluded, maintaining awareness of our movements and communications without active intervention. For now, Bryony cautioned, but if they believe we're investigating them, that could change rapidly. The turning point came unexpectedly through Valerie's connection to the military family support organization where she worked. A new client, the widow of a service member who had participated in experimental medical treatments before his death, shared documentation that connected directly to the Swiss operation. He was part of a trial using regenerative techniques developed at Sentinel, Valerie explained, showing Dominic the records the widow had provided. The consent forms don't disclose the full risks, just like in the original cases that brought down Kindle. This concrete evidence of continuing dangerous practices shifted their approach from defensive to active. With carefully selected allies in regulatory agencies, medical ethics committees, and journalism, they began building a case to expose and shut down the operation. Throughout this process, Dominic maintained heightened security around his family, particularly during a tense period when their investigation triggered increased surveillance activity. Additional security personnel were discreetly assigned to monitor Wren and Porter's school and activities, while Quincy was briefed on enhanced protocols at MIT. The situation reached critical mass when one of their journalistic contacts in Switzerland was hospitalized after an apparent hit-and-run accident, shortly after requesting comment from the medical conglomerate about specific research protocols. "This is escalating," Dominic told Bryony and Valerie during an emergency meeting. "We need to accelerate our timeline before anyone else gets hurt." The decision was made to release their evidence simultaneously to multiple international regulatory agencies and selected journalists, a coordinated exposure that would be impossible to contain or discredit. As they prepared for this decisive step, Dominic received an unexpected call from Detective Hawthorne, now retired but still maintaining contacts in law enforcement. "You need to know something," Hawthorne said, his voice grave. "Prescott Kindle died last night in the medical facility. Natural causes, according to the report, complications from his Parkinson's." The news landed strangely. Not grief, certainly, but a complex recognition of a chapter truly ending. For years, Kindle had remained a presence in their lives, even from behind bars, his influence extending through legal proceedings, the educational trusts, and now this final investigation. "Does this change anything about the current situation?" Dominic asked pragmatically. "Possibly," Hawthorne replied. "If his death triggers any contingency plans, like the evidence release that occurred with his diagnosis. His attorney has requested a meeting with you and Valerie tomorrow. Apparently, there are final instructions to be delivered." The meeting took place in the sterile conference room of an upscale law firm. Roland Forsyth, Kindle's longtime attorney, appeared older but no less precisely composed than when he had defended Kindle years earlier. "Thank you for coming," he began, placing a sealed envelope and external hard drive on the table. "My client left explicit instructions that these materials be delivered to you both within 24 hours of his death." "What are they?" Valerie asked cautiously. "I don't know the specific contents," Forsyth admitted. Mr. Kindle maintained certain confidentialities even from his legal counsel. However, he indicated they contained information relevant to ongoing concerns about research activities conducted under former Sentinel protocols. Dominic and Valerie exchanged glances, the timing too significant to be coincidental. "Did he know about our investigation?" Dominic asked directly. Forsyth's expression revealed nothing. Mr. Kindle maintained certain information networks even during his incarceration. "I cannot speak to the extent of his knowledge about your recent activities." After signing the necessary documentation confirming receipt, Dominic and Valerie left with the materials, immediately taking them to a secure location where Bryony and Quincy waited. The hard drive contained comprehensive documentation of the Swiss operation, far more detailed than what they had assembled themselves. Financial records, personnel files, research protocols, and most significantly, a complete communication archive revealing the extent of the conspiracy to continue Sentinel's most profitable but dangerous research lines. He was monitoring them the entire time, Bryony realized, scanning through the files. Even from prison, he was keeping tabs on his former colleagues. "But why give us this now?" Valerie questioned. "Why not during his lifetime?" The answer lay in the sealed letter, addressed to both Dominic and Valerie in Kindle's elegant handwriting. "By the time you read this, I will have finally relinquished the last illusions of control that define my existence. The enclosed materials represent my final contribution to rectifying wrongs I either committed or permitted through willful blindness. The Swiss operation was never authorized to continue the specific protocols that led to patient deaths under Sentinel's management. Former associates exploited my absence to resurrect research I had personally discontinued after recognizing the ethical compromises involved. Their continued surveillance of your family stems from fear that Lyle Patterson's complete findings might eventually surface through you. They are right to fear this. The final piece of Lyle's evidence, the connecting thread he discovered before his death, is contained in the encoded file marked Phoenix Protocol. The decryption key is the middle name of your youngest child, Porter. I have maintained awareness of these operations from prison, gathering evidence methodically with the intention of exposing them upon my death, when no retaliation against me would be possible. The timing of this delivery is not coincidental. I became aware of your own investigation and accelerated my timeline accordingly. This represents neither redemption nor absolution, merely the fulfillment of an obligation long overdue. Use this information as you see fit, with the understanding that those involved will stop at nothing to prevent exposure. Prescott Kendall. The encoded file, when decrypted using James Porter's middle name, a detail Kendall would have known from the children's documentation during their time with him, revealed the complete architecture of the criminal enterprise that had begun under Sentinel's legitimate operations. Lyle had mapped not just the medical improprieties, but the financial network supporting them. Billions in profits from treatments rushed to market without adequate safety verification. This is everything we needed, Quincy said, reviewing the technical details with growing excitement. Enough to shut down the entire operation permanently and prosecute everyone involved, Briney added, including those who arranged Lyle's death. The comprehensive nature of the evidence transformed their approach. Rather than the careful, incremental exposure they had planned, they now had the means for decisive, overwhelming action. Within hours, they had transmitted the complete files to their contacts in regulatory agencies, law enforcement, and journalism. The response was immediate and dramatic. International arrest warrants were issued for key figures in the Swiss operation. Financial accounts were frozen. Research facilities were raided simultaneously across 3 countries. For the Merritt family, the most significant outcome was the arrest of 2 former Sentinel executives directly implicated in ordering Lyle's murder, men who had escaped justice in the original investigation due to insufficient evidence. The proof Kendall had meticulously compiled left no room for legal maneuvering. As the operation unraveled publicly, security monitoring confirmed what they had hoped. The surveillance on the Merritt family ceased completely. With their principals facing prosecution and their financial resources frozen, the network had no capacity to maintain its monitoring activities. 3 weeks after Kendall's death, as the legal proceedings against his former associates dominated business news, Dominic and Valerie gathered their children for a family meeting. Quincy returned from MIT, while Wren and Porter were finally given the complete picture of the situation that had necessitated the recent security measures. "So it's really over?" Wren asked, processing the complex narrative. "No more looking over our shoulders?" "As over as anything like this can be," Dominic confirmed. "The people who posed a threat are being held accountable. The operations they ran are dismantled. Because of Uncle Lyle," Porter noted thoughtfully, "his evidence finally did what he intended. And because of Kendall, in the end," Quincy added, the irony not lost on any of them, "his final act was exposing the very people he once protected." Valerie, who had been quietly contemplative throughout the discussion, finally spoke. "I've been thinking about forgiveness," she said carefully. "Not forgiving Kendall. I don't believe that's necessary or even appropriate given everything that happened. But forgiving ourselves. For the mistakes, the misunderstandings, the years lost." Her words resonated deeply, particularly for Dominic. Despite the family's remarkable reconstruction, he had carried a persistent weight of self-recrimination, for not recognizing Valerie's vulnerability to manipulation, for not finding his children sooner, for the times his anger had complicated their healing. "We did the best we could with the information we had at each point," he acknowledged, even when that wasn't enough. As the conversation continued, each family member sharing their perspective on the journey that had shaped them, a subtle but significant shift occurred. The past, which had for so long defined their present through caution and unresolved questions, began to recede into its proper place, informing but no longer constraining their future. Later that evening, as Dominic and Valerie walked together in the garden behind his home, she paused beside a flowering tree the children had planted years earlier to mark the anniversary of their reunion. "Do you remember what Porter said when we planted this?" she asked. "That growing things need both sunshine and rain." Dominic nodded, recalling his youngest son's innate wisdom. "Nature's balance." I think we've had our share of storms, Valerie said quietly. Maybe it's finally time for some sustained sunshine. The metaphor captured perfectly what Dominic had been feeling, a sense of emerging from a long shadow into something clearer and warmer. Not perfect, not unmarked by what had come before, but fundamentally sound and capable of growth. I think you're right, he agreed simply. As they continued their walk, discussing practical matters about the children's upcoming activities, Dominic recognized that the most profound victory over the past wasn't in legal resolutions or exposed conspiracies, but in this moment of ordinary conversation. Two parents focused on their children's futures rather than the threats that had once consumed them. The ghosts that had haunted them for so long hadn't been vanquished through confrontation, but had simply lost their power to disrupt the life they had rebuilt with such determined care. Chapter 9. Legacies. 10 years after Prescott Kendall's conviction, the Merritt family gathered to celebrate Quincy's graduation from MIT with dual master's degrees in computer science and engineering. The ceremony, held on a perfect spring day, represented more than academic achievement. It symbolized the full emergence of a young man whose childhood had been fractured by deception and manipulation. Dominic, now approaching 50, watched with undisguised pride as his oldest son crossed the stage to receive his diplomas. Beside him sat Valerie, elegant in a blue dress, discreetly wiping tears. Ren, now 22 and in her final year of art school, recorded the moment on her camera. Porter, 20, home from his sophomore year studying psychology, cheered loudly enough to draw amused glances from nearby families. They were, by any measure, an ordinary family celebrating an extraordinary milestone. Yet Dominic knew how extraordinarily hard-won this ordinariness had been. The years of therapy, the patient rebuilding of trust, the gradual integration of painful history into a cohesive family narrative that acknowledged trauma without being defined by it. After the ceremony, as they gathered for photographs beneath flowering trees, Dominic found himself momentarily overwhelmed by the distance they had traveled. From the desperate father searching for vanished children to this, a family intact, thriving even, despite everything that had tried to destroy it. "You okay, Dad?" Quincy asked, noticing his father's emotional moment. "More than okay," Dominic assured him, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "Just incredibly proud." The celebration continued at an upscale restaurant where they were joined by significant others and close friends. Ren's longtime boyfriend Troy, a musician whose gentle patience had helped her overcome lingering trust issues. Porter's best friend Zach, who had become almost another son to Dominic over years of sleepovers and shared activities. And perhaps most notably, Bernard, the education administrator Valerie had been dating seriously for nearly 3 years. As glasses were raised to toast Quincy's achievement, Dominic observed the easy interactions among this expanded circle. The rigid boundaries that had once characterized their post-reunion life, separate households, careful schedules, monitored communications, had softened into something more organic and flexible. The wounds that had required such careful handling had healed enough to bear the natural stresses of ordinary family life. That evening, after the celebration had concluded and the younger generation had departed for their own adventures, Dominic and Valerie found themselves alone on the balcony of his hotel room, sharing a quiet moment as they often did during family gatherings. "Remember when we couldn't imagine this?" Valerie asked, gazing at the city lights. "When we were fighting over custody and supervised visitation, and it seemed impossible that we'd ever be able to celebrate anything together?" "Those were dark days," Dominic acknowledged. "For all of us. Yet here we are," Valerie said softly, "co-parenting adult children who somehow survived our mistakes intact." "More than survived," Dominic corrected gently. "They've thrived. And not despite what happened, but partly because of how we all chose to handle it afterward." The conversation turned reflective, as it sometimes did when they were alone together, the shared history creating a unique understanding that no one else in their lives could fully comprehend. "I've been offered the directorship of the Veterans Family Program," Valerie mentioned. "It would mean relocating to Washington." "That's a significant opportunity," Dominic noted. "Are you considering it?" "Bernard thinks I should take it. He's been looking for positions there anyway." The casual mention of future plans with her partner no longer triggered the complex emotions it once might have. Time had transformed their relationship from the broken fragments of a marriage into something different but valuable. Not quite friendship, but a connection grounded in mutual respect and shared commitment to their children. "You'd be excellent in that role," Dominic said sincerely. "You understand those families' challenges in ways few administrators could." "Because of our history," Valerie acknowledged. "The same experiences that nearly destroyed us also created the perspective that makes me effective in this work." The observation struck Dominic as profoundly true, not just for Valerie, but for all of them. Quincy's interest in security systems had evolved directly from his experience of vulnerability. Ren's art explored themes of identity and reconstruction. Porter's focus on psychology reflected his role as the family's emotional barometer during their most difficult times. Even Dominic's own career had been shaped by the experience, his teaching at West Point emphasizing ethical leadership and decision-making under pressure, informed by his personal understanding of how high the stakes could be. "We've all found ways to metabolize the pain into something constructive," he observed. "That's no small achievement." The following morning brought a different kind of milestone: the first visit to Lyle Patterson's newly placed memorial. Though his body had been buried years earlier in a military ceremony, the family had only recently created a proper headstone after the final legal proceedings against those responsible for his death had concluded. The simple granite marker bore not only his name and dates, but an inscription that acknowledged the truth of his life and death, whose courage revealed truth at the ultimate cost. As they stood together at the gravesite, Dominic noticed Porter place a small stone atop the marker, a gesture he explained had been adopted from Jewish tradition, signifying remembrance. "I don't really remember him," Porter admitted. "I was too young. But his actions shaped our entire lives. He was a lot like you," Valerie told her youngest son. "Observant, thoughtful, willing to stand up for what he believed was right." The visit brought a sense of completion, honoring the man whose discovery had triggered the cascade of events that had transformed their family. Not with anger or bitterness, but with recognition of his sacrifice and the justice finally secured in his name. From the cemetery, they drove to a location that held very different memories: the cabin where Kendall had been captured after faking his death. Now owned by a conservation trust, the property looked substantially different, the original structure replaced with a nature center. "Why did you want to come here?" Ren asked, curious about her father's request to visit this particular site. "To see how completely places can transform," Dominic explained. "This was once the scene of one of our darkest moments. Now it's something entirely new and positive." The metaphor wasn't lost on his perceptive children, who had grown into adults capable of appreciating the symbolic significance of such gestures. As they explored the nature center and surrounding trails, Dominic found himself walking alone with Quincy, their conversation turning to the younger man's future plans. "I've been offered a position with a cybersecurity firm specializing in healthcare systems," Quincy revealed. "Ironic, considering our history." "Do you want it?" Dominic asked simply. "I think I do," Quincy admitted. "The chance to protect patients and medical data from the kind of exploitation we've seen firsthand. It feels like closing a circle somehow. Using what you know from our experience to prevent similar situations," Dominic observed. "That's a powerful purpose." Quincy nodded, then hesitated before adding, "I've also been thinking about the trust funds." From Kindle, the educational trust had been a complex legacy, used as the family had decided years earlier, partially for education, partially donated to veterans' causes. The funds had helped support Quincy through MIT and were now assisting Ren and Porter with their studies. "What about them?" Dominic asked. "I want to use the remainder of mine to establish a scholarship," Quincy explained, "for children whose families have been affected by medical ethics violations, to help them rebuild like we did." The proposal reflected so perfectly the journey their family had traveled, transforming something tainted by manipulation into a genuine force for good. "I think that's an excellent idea," Dominic said, his voice thick with emotion. As the day concluded and the family prepared to disperse again to their respective lives, Quincy to his new job, Ren to complete her final art school project, Porter back to his university studies, Dominic experienced a profound sense of completion. The story that had begun with desperate searching, continued through painful revelations, and evolved through careful rebuilding had reached a natural conclusion. Not perfect, not unmarked by scars, but whole in a way that once seemed impossible. That evening, in the quiet of his home, Dominic opened a box he had kept sealed for many years, containing mementos from the search for his family. Missing person posters, notes from dead-end leads, the small toys he had carried to remember the children during the darkest days of uncertainty. He had preserved these items as a reminder of what had been at stake, what had nearly been lost forever. Now, as he handled each object, he recognized that their power had diminished. They were artifacts of a chapter that no longer defined their present. After careful consideration, he selected a few meaningful items to keep. A drawing Wren had made before the disappearance, the baseball cap Quincy had worn constantly as a child, the small stuffed elephant that had been Porter's constant companion. The rest, he decided, could finally be put away, not forgotten, but no longer needing to occupy space in their ongoing life. As he completed this ritual of selective remembrance, his phone buzzed with incoming messages, photos from each of his children, sharing moments from their evening. Quincy at dinner with colleagues from his new job, Wren putting finishing touches on an art installation, Porter studying with friends. Ordinary moments from lives that had overcome extraordinary challenges. Lives that were neither defined by trauma nor untouched by it, but had integrated difficult experiences into something resilient and authentic. In these simple images, his children moving forward with purpose and connection, Dominic found the truest measure of their family's journey. The greatest revenge against those who had sought to destroy them wasn't in legal victories or exposed conspiracies, but in this. They had reclaimed the right to ordinary happiness, to futures shaped by choice rather than reaction. The ghost of what had happened would always be present, acknowledged in therapy sessions and family discussions, visible in certain cautious habits and occasional moments of unexpected emotion. But it no longer haunted them. They had robbed it of that power through the patient, determined work of rebuilding. Not the family they had once been, but the family they had chosen to become. As Dominic closed the box and returned it to its shelf, he felt the weight of the past finally settling into its proper place. A chapter in their story rather than the story itself. The future, with all its ordinary challenges and joys, awaited them unencumbered. And in that simple truth lay their most complete victory. Epilogue, full circle. 15 years after finding his vanished family, Colonel Dominic Merritt stood at the podium of West Point's graduation ceremony, preparing to deliver his final address before retirement. At 55, with silver hair and lines of experience etched into his face, he commanded the attention of cadets and families with the quiet authority that had become his hallmark. Leadership, he began, is ultimately about choices made under pressure. How we respond when the structures we rely upon fail us. The actions we take when faced with betrayal, loss, or seemingly insurmountable obstacles. From his seat in the audience, Porter Merritt, now 25 and completing his doctoral program in psychology, listened with particular attention. Unlike his siblings, who had pursued careers in technology and art, Porter had followed a path directly influenced by his family's experiences, specializing in trauma recovery and family systems. Beside him sat his mother, Valerie, whose work directing the National Veterans Family Support Program had recently earned congressional recognition. Her partner Bernard, now her husband of 5 years, held her hand as they listened to Dominic's address. The true measure of leadership isn't found in victories easily won, Dominic continued, but in how we navigate our darkest moments. How we choose integration over bitterness, understanding over vengeance, rebuilding over retreat. In the years since Kendall's death and the exposure of his former associates, the Merritt family had indeed chosen integration, not just of their painful history, but of the insights it had yielded. Quincy's cybersecurity firm specialized in protecting vulnerable populations from digital exploitation. Wren's acclaimed art installations explored themes of identity and reconstruction. Porter's research was revolutionizing approaches to family trauma recovery. Even Valerie's work with military families drew directly from their experience, creating systems to support those navigating deployment, separation, and reunion, with particular attention to children's needs during transitions. The leadership I've tried to exemplify, Dominic told the graduating cadets, acknowledges that our greatest challenges often come not from external enemies, but from the complex terrain of human relationships and ethical decisions. As he spoke, His eyes found his family in the audience, the people whose journey with him had informed every aspect of his teaching philosophy, the children who had grown into remarkable adults despite, or perhaps partly because of, the crucible they had endured together. Our personal stories inform our leadership, he concluded, not because we should lead from emotion, but because genuine understanding of human complexity makes us more effective in guiding others through their own challenges. The standing ovation that followed spoke to the impact of Dominic's tenure at the Academy, his commitment to ethical leadership and decision-making under pressure, representing a legacy that would continue through the officers he had trained. After the ceremony, as the extended family gathered for photographs and congratulations, Dominic found himself surrounded by not just his children, but the lives they had built. Quincy with his wife Maya and their 2-year-old daughter Elise. Ren with her partner Troy and news of their recent engagement. Porter with his girlfriend Amara, a fellow psychologist who specialized in children's trauma recovery. Speech got a bit personal there, Dad, Quincy observed with a knowing smile. All the best ones do, Dominic replied. Besides, who better to teach about resilience than a family that's lived it? Later that evening, at the retirement dinner held in Dominic's honor, a surprise guest arrived, Detective Silas Hawthorne, now in his 70s, but still sharp-eyed and observant. The man who had believed Dominic's instincts about his missing family when others dismissed him as delusional had remained a periodic presence in their lives, a witness to their reconstruction. Full circle, Major, Hawthorne said, using Dominic's old rank with deliberate nostalgia as they embraced. From the desperate father in my office to the distinguished colonel retiring after shaping a generation of leaders. Couldn't have done it without you believing me when it mattered most, Dominic acknowledged. As speeches were given and memories shared, the narrative of Dominic's career naturally interwove with the personal journey that had informed it. Former students spoke of his compassionate approach to ethical dilemmas. Colleagues praised his ability to transform personal experience into universal leadership principles. When Porter rose to offer his own tribute, his words captured the essence of what the family had achieved together. My father taught me that our most painful experiences can become our greatest sources of wisdom, not despite the suffering they cause, but because of how they deepen our understanding of human frailty and resilience. He showed me that true strength lies not in avoiding vulnerability, but in transforming it into connection and purpose. The words resonated deeply for Dominic, who had spent years helping his children process their trauma while simultaneously processing his own. The journey had not been linear or simple, but it had been authentic. Each setback acknowledged, each milestone celebrated, each challenge faced together. As the evening concluded and guests began to depart, Dominic found himself alone with Valerie for a moment on the venue's terrace, reminiscent of the quiet conversations they had shared throughout their reconstructed relationship. Did you ever imagine this? She asked, gesturing toward the room where their extended family continued to celebrate. 15 years ago, when everything was still so broken? Not specifically, Dominic admitted. I just knew I wouldn't stop trying to build something whole from what remained. That was always your strength, Valerie observed, even when I thought it was stubbornness. They shared a smile at the observation, acknowledgement of how perspective had shifted over years of healing and growth. Bernard and I are considering fostering, Valerie revealed after a moment. Children from military families in crisis. My work has shown me how many need temporary support during their parents' deployments or transitions. You'd be exceptional at that, Dominic said sincerely. Both of you. I learned from experience what children need most during disruption, Valerie said. Consistency, honesty, the space to process complex emotions without judgment. The lessons were hard-won, Dominic acknowledged, but fully integrated. As they rejoined the gathering, Dominic observed his family with the perspective that 15 years of reconstruction had provided. The ghost of what had happened would always be part of their story, acknowledged in certain cautious habits, occasional moments of heightened vigilance, the specialized work each had chosen. But it no longer defined them. They had reclaimed the authority to write their own narrative, to choose integration over fracture, connection over isolation, purpose over bitterness. In the days following his retirement ceremony, Dominic finalized the purchase of a lake house he had been considering, a place large enough for family gatherings but intimate enough for quiet reflection. As he arranged his belongings in the new space, he came across the box of mementos from the search that he had preserved all these years. With careful deliberation, he selected a single item, the small compass he had carried throughout the 2 year search for his family. Not as a reminder of loss, but as a symbol of finding one's way through darkness toward what matters most. The compass took its place on his desk, alongside recent photographs of his children and granddaughter, the past and present in balanced perspective, each informing the other without dominance. That evening, as Dominic sat on the dock watching sunset colors reflect across the lake, he recognized that the journey that had begun in desperate searching had concluded in something approaching peace. Not perfect, not unmarked by scars, but fundamentally whole. The ghost of the past had been transformed into the wisdom of the present, not through forgetting or denying, but through the patient, determined work of integration. What had once been their greatest vulnerability had become, in time, their unique strength. And in that transformation lay the truest measure of their victory. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.